Marcus Wellington adjusted his Italian silk tie as he stepped out of his black Bentley onto the cobblestone driveway of Villa Serenita. The Mediterranean sun cast long shadows across the sprawling estate he had just purchased for $32 million. This wasn't just another property acquisition for the tech billionaire. This was his escape, his sanctuary from the relentless demands of Silicon Valley and the suffocating expectations of high society. The villa stood majestically against the backdrop of rolling Tuscan hills, its honey-colored stone walls weathered by centuries of Italian sun and rain. Cypress trees lined the winding path to the main entrance, their dark green spires reaching toward a cloudless azure sky. Marcus had fallen in love with this place the moment his real estate agent showed him the photos. After months of negotiations and legal paperwork, it was finally his. "Senior Wellington, welcome," called a distinguished man in his 60s approaching from the villa's entrance. Giuseppe Moretti, the estate manager, had worked at Villa Serenita for over 30 years. His weathered hands and kind eyes spoke of decades spent caring for this magnificent property. Behind him walked a small woman dressed in simple black clothing, her gray hair pulled back into a neat bun. "This is Maria Santos," Giuseppe explained in accented English. "She has been the head housekeeper here for 25 years. She knows every corner of this house better than anyone." Maria stepped forward slightly, her dark eyes studying Marcus with an intensity that made him momentarily uncomfortable. She was probably in her late 50s, with olive skin that showed the lines of hard work and worry. Something about her presence commanded respect, despite her humble position. "Buongiorno, Senior Wellington," Maria said softly, her voice carrying a musical quality that Marcus found oddly soothing. "Welcome to your new home." Marcus nodded politely, though he had already decided he would be making significant changes to the staff. He preferred his privacy and had little patience for the formalities of maintaining household help. In his world, efficiency mattered more than tradition. Giuseppe began the grand tour, leading Marcus through rooms filled with priceless antiques and artwork. The villa boasted 12 bedrooms, each decorated in period furniture that told stories of the Italian aristocracy who had once called this place home. Frescoed ceilings depicted scenes from classical mythology, while marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers that had illuminated countless dinner parties over the centuries. The previous owner, Count Alessandro Benedetti, lived here for 40 years, Giuseppe explained as they walked through the main salon. His family had owned this property for over 200 years. The Count was very particular about maintaining the villa's historical authenticity. Marcus half listened to the historical details, more interested in the practical aspects of the property. He mentally cataloged which rooms he would convert for his needs. The library would become his home office. The morning room would house his collection of vintage guitars, and several of the guest bedrooms would be transformed into a state-of-the-art fitness facility. As they moved through the villa, Maria followed at a respectful distance, occasionally dusting a piece of furniture or straightening a curtain. Marcus noticed how she moved through the space with an intimate familiarity, as if she were part of the villa itself. Her presence was quiet but constant, like a shadow that belonged to the place. The kitchen was a masterpiece of rustic elegance, with hand-painted ceramic tiles and copper pots hanging from wrought iron hooks. A massive stone fireplace dominated one wall, while modern appliances had been discreetly integrated to maintain the room's old-world charm. Giuseppe explained that Maria was an exceptional cook, trained in traditional Tuscan cuisine by her grandmother. The Count always said Maria's osso buco was better than any restaurant in Florence, Giuseppe added with a warm smile. Maria's cheeks flushed slightly at the compliment, but she remained silent. Marcus's attention was drawn to an ornate wine cellar that Giuseppe was eager to show him. The temperature-controlled room housed over 500 bottles, some dating back to the early 1900s. Rare Brunellos and Chiantis filled the wooden racks, representing a collection worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. The Count was passionate about wine, Giuseppe explained, running his hand along one of the dusty bottles. He spent decades building this collection. Each bottle has a story, a special occasion it was saved for. Marcus examined several bottles, impressed despite himself. He wasn't a wine connoisseur, but he recognized quality when he saw it. These weren't just wines, they were liquid investments, pieces of history preserved in glass and cork. As they concluded the tour, Giuseppe handed Marcus an ornate set of keys. These open every door in the villa, he explained. The master key opens the wine cellar, the library safe, and the Count's private study. Maria knows the location of every key and lock in this house. That evening, Marcus sat alone on the villa's expansive terrace, watching the sun set over the Tuscan countryside. The landscape stretched endlessly before him, dotted with olive groves and vineyard rows that created natural patterns across the rolling hills. A gentle breeze carried the scent of lavender and rosemary from the villa's gardens. For the first time in months, Marcus felt a sense of peace. His technology empire had made him incredibly wealthy, but it had also consumed every aspect of his life. Board meetings, product launches, media interviews, and constant pressure to innovate had left him feeling hollow and disconnected from any sense of genuine satisfaction. His marriage to socialite Catherine Ashworth had ended in a bitter divorce 2 years earlier, costing him over $100 million in settlements. Catherine had accused him of being emotionally unavailable, of caring more about his stock portfolio than their relationship. Looking back, Marcus had to admit she wasn't entirely wrong. The villa represented more than just another real estate acquisition. It was his chance to rediscover who he was beneath the layers of wealth and success. Here, surrounded by centuries of history and natural beauty, he hoped to find something that had been missing from his life for far too long. Maria appeared on the terrace carrying a silver tray with a simple dinner. "Senior Wellington, I prepared something light for your first evening," she said in her careful English. "Fresh pasta with herbs from the garden, and bread baked this afternoon." The meal was simple but perfect. The pasta was silky and flavorful, the herbs bright and aromatic. Marcus realized he hadn't tasted food this genuine in years. His usual diet consisted of expensive restaurant meals eaten during business meetings or catered affairs at charity galas where the focus was on networking rather than nourishment. "This is excellent, Maria," he said genuinely. "Thank you." Maria smiled, the first real warmth he had seen from her. "Cooking is love made visible, Senior. My nana taught me that when I was a small girl." Over the following days, Marcus began to settle into a rhythm at the villa. He would wake early, coffee prepared perfectly by Maria, and spend his mornings handling business calls on the terrace. The time difference with California worked in his favor, allowing him to participate in important meetings while enjoying the peaceful Italian countryside. Giuseppe proved to be an invaluable source of local knowledge. He knew every tradesman in the area, every restaurant worth visiting, and every hidden corner of the estate that held special beauty or historical significance. Under his guidance, Marcus began to appreciate the villa not just as a property, but as a living piece of cultural heritage. Maria's presence remained constant but unobtrusive. She seemed to anticipate his needs before he voiced them, ensuring his coffee was always at the perfect temperature, his meals balanced and delicious, and his living spaces immaculately maintained without him ever feeling intruded upon. What impressed Marcus most was Maria's obvious intelligence. Though her formal education had been limited, she possessed an intuitive understanding of people and situations that rivaled any business executive he had worked with. She observed everything, remembered every detail, and somehow always knew exactly what was needed without being asked. One morning, Marcus discovered Maria in the villa's herb garden, carefully tending to rows of basil, oregano, and thyme. She worked with the practiced movements of someone who had performed these tasks countless times, her hands gentle but efficient among the plants. "You know a lot about gardening," Marcus observed, joining her among the fragrant herbs. "The earth teaches you if you listen," Maria replied, not looking up from her work. "Each plant has its own personality, its own needs. Some require much water, others prefer dry soil. Some love full sun, others need shade. You must pay attention to understand what each one requires to flourish." Marcus found himself oddly moved by her simple wisdom. In his world, problems were solved through data analysis, market research, and strategic planning. The idea of listening to something as fundamental as soil and sunlight seemed almost revolutionary in its simplicity. As the weeks passed, Marcus began to understand why the previous count had valued Maria so highly. She wasn't just a housekeeper. She was the heart of the villa, the person who maintained not just its physical beauty, but its soul. Under her care, the house felt alive, warm, and welcoming in a way that no amount of expensive decoration could achieve. The other staff members clearly respected Maria's authority and judgment. When questions arose about household matters, they came to her first. Giuseppe consulted with her on decisions about the gardens and grounds. Even the local tradespeople who came to perform maintenance work treated her with a deference that spoke to her reputation in the community. Marcus's business associates and friends from America began visiting the villa, and he found himself oddly proud to show off not just the property's grandeur, but the exceptional care with which it was maintained. Maria's cooking became legendary among his guests, who often asked if they could hire her services for their own events. "She's remarkable," commented Jonathan Hayes, Marcus's longtime business partner, during a weekend visit. "I've stayed in five-star hotels that couldn't match the service and attention to detail you have here. Where did you find her?" "She came with the property," Marcus replied, realizing as he said it how fortunate he had been. "She's been here for 25 years. Hold on to her," Jonathan advised. "Good help is impossible to find these days, especially someone who clearly takes such pride in their work." Marcus was beginning to understand that Maria represented something increasingly rare in his experience. Genuine excellence motivated not by profit or recognition, but by a deep personal commitment to doing things properly. In his technology-driven world, human craftsmanship and personal dedication were becoming extinct qualities. The villa's wine collection continued to fascinate Marcus. During quiet evenings, he would descend to the temperature-controlled cellar and examine the carefully organized bottles. Giuseppe had given him a leather-bound catalog that detailed the provenance of each wine, noting which occasions the Count had planned to open them for. Many bottles had never been opened, save for celebrations that never came or special guests who never arrived. Marcus found this somehow melancholy. What was the point of collecting beautiful things if you never enjoyed them? He began selecting wines for dinner, sharing them with Giuseppe and Maria when they joined him for evening meals on the terrace. These dinners became the highlight of Marcus's days. Giuseppe would tell stories about the villa's history, the famous guests who had visited over the decades, and the traditions that had been maintained for generations. Maria would contribute observations about the local community, the changing seasons, and the subtle rhythms of life in the Tuscan countryside. For the first time since his divorce, Marcus felt part of something larger than his own ambitions. The villa was becoming more than his retreat. It was becoming his home in a way that his California mansion had never been. There was something healing about being surrounded by beauty that had endured for centuries, cared for by people who understood that true wealth lay not in acquisition but in preservation and appreciation. One evening, as Maria cleared the dinner dishes from the terrace, Marcus noticed her pause at the wine glass he had barely touched. She studied the deep red liquid for a moment, her expression becoming thoughtful, almost concerned. "Is everything all right, Maria?" he asked. She looked at him for a long moment, as if weighing her words carefully. "The wine, Senior Wellington. It tastes different tonight. Perhaps it has turned, or maybe the bottle was stored improperly." Marcus woke the next morning feeling unusually sluggish and disoriented. His head pounded with an intensity that seemed disproportionate to the single glass of wine he had consumed the previous evening. As someone who maintained strict control over his alcohol consumption, especially during business trips, this level of discomfort was both unexpected and concerning. He stumbled to the bathroom, gripping the marble counter as a wave of nausea swept over him. His reflection in the antique mirror showed bloodshot eyes and pale skin that looked almost gray in the morning light. Something was definitely wrong, but he couldn't identify what might have caused such a severe reaction. Maria appeared at his bedroom door carrying a tray with coffee and fresh pastries, her usual morning routine. One look at Marcus's condition and her expression immediately changed to one of deep concern. "Senior Wellington, you are not well," she observed, setting the tray aside and approaching him with the quick efficiency of someone accustomed to caring for others. "Please sit down." Marcus gratefully sank into the leather armchair near the window, his hands trembling slightly. "I don't understand what's happening," he admitted. "I feel terrible, but I barely drank anything last night. Maria studied his face with the intensity of a diagnostician. Her dark eyes moved from his pale complexion to his shaking hands to the way he held his head. The wine, she said quietly, almost to herself. I knew something was wrong with that wine. What do you mean? Marcus asked, though speaking made his headache worse. Maria hesitated, clearly wrestling with whether to share her thoughts. Finally, she sat on the edge of the bed, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Senior Wellington, I have worked in this house for 25 years. I have served thousands of bottles of wine to the Count and his guests. I know every vintage in that cellar, and I know how each one should taste, how it should smell, how it should make people feel. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Last night, that wine was wrong. Not spoiled, not turned. Something else. Something that should not have been there. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with his physical condition. Are you saying someone tampered with the wine? I am saying that in 25 years, I have learned to trust my instincts about what enters this house and what people consume under this roof, Maria replied. And my instincts told me that wine was dangerous. The implications of her words began to sink in. If Maria was right, if someone had indeed tampered with the wine, then Marcus had just experienced a deliberate poisoning attempt. But who would want to harm him? And how would they have gained access to the villa's secured wine cellar? Giuseppe appeared in the doorway, his face creased with worry. Maria called me, he explained. She said you were unwell. Should we contact a doctor? Marcus started to shake his head, then stopped as the movement triggered another wave of nausea. Maybe that's a good idea, he admitted. But first, I want to know more about that wine bottle from last night. The three of them made their way to the wine cellar, Marcus moving slowly and carefully. The temperature-controlled room felt particularly cool against his fevered skin. Giuseppe located the empty bottle from the previous evening, a 1982 Barolo that should have been worth several $1,000s. This was one of the Count's most prized bottles, Giuseppe explained, handling the empty container with reverence. He saved it for over 20 years, waiting for the perfect occasion to open it. Maria examined the bottle closely, turning it in her hands and studying the label and cork. Look here, she said, pointing to almost invisible scratches around the cork area. Someone has opened this bottle before. Very carefully, very professionally, but open nonetheless. Marcus's business mind immediately began analyzing the situation. You're saying someone removed the original wine, contaminated it, or replaced it with something else, then resealed the bottle so expertly that it appeared untouched. It would require considerable skill and the right equipment, Giuseppe admitted. But, yes, it's possible. The question is who would have access to this cellar and the expertise to perform such a delicate operation. The realization that he had been deliberately targeted hit Marcus like a physical blow. In his world of corporate competition and hostile takeovers, he had made enemies, but the idea that someone would follow him to Italy and attempt to poison him seemed almost surreal. We need to contact the police, Marcus said, though his voice lacked conviction. The idea of involving Italian law enforcement in what might be an international conspiracy seemed overwhelming in his current condition. With respect, Senior Wellington, Maria interrupted. Perhaps we should first understand who might wish you harm and how they gained access to information about your wine consumption habits. Her practical approach impressed Marcus even through his physical discomfort. Maria was right. Randomly reporting a suspected poisoning would likely result in a prolonged investigation that might never identify the perpetrator while exposing Marcus to unwanted media attention. Who knew about your dinner plans last night? Giuseppe asked. Who knew you would be drinking from the Count's private collection? Marcus tried to focus his thoughts through the persistent headache. The previous day had been relatively quiet, with only a few business calls and emails. He had mentioned his evening wine selection to his assistant in California, discussed the villa's collection with his friend Jonathan during a brief phone conversation, and posted a photo of the vineyard view on his private social media account. I need to review my communications from yesterday, Marcus said. Someone with access to my private information knew exactly what I planned to drink and when. Maria stood abruptly, her expression shifting to one of fierce determination. Senior Wellington, there is something else you must know. Something about why the Count valued my judgment so highly, and why I have survived in this position for 25 years while other staff members came and went. She paused, clearly debating whether to reveal something she had kept private. I was not always a housekeeper. Before coming to work for the Count, I was a nurse in Naples. I worked in the emergency ward where we saw many cases of poisoning, both accidental and deliberate. I learned to recognize the signs, the symptoms, the subtle indicators that something was wrong. This revelation explained Maria's clinical observation of Marcus's condition and her immediate suspicion about the wine. Her medical background had given her knowledge that went far beyond typical household management. The Count knew about my nursing experience, Maria continued. He hired me not just as a housekeeper, but as someone who could protect his household from threats he feared but could not identify. In his later years, he became increasingly paranoid about assassination attempts. He believed his business enemies might try to harm him through poisoned food or drink. Giuseppe nodded solemnly. The Count received several threatening letters in his final years. He never reported them to the police, but he became very cautious about what he consumed and who prepared his meals. Were his fears justified? Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Maria and Giuseppe exchanged a meaningful glance. The Count died of what appeared to be a heart attack, Giuseppe said carefully. But he was in excellent health for his age. His personal physician was surprised by the suddenness of his death. The implication hung heavy in the air. If the Count had indeed been murdered, then the villa itself might be a target, and Marcus's purchase of the property could have made him a secondary victim. Why didn't you tell me this when I bought the villa? Marcus demanded, his illness temporarily forgotten in the face of this revelation. Because we hoped the threat died with the Count, Maria replied. We hoped that whoever wanted him dead would have no interest in the new owner. We were wrong. Marcus's phone buzzed with an incoming call from his head of security in California. James Morrison was a former FBI agent who managed security for all of Marcus's properties and business interests. The timing of his call seemed almost psychic. Marcus, we've detected some unusual activity around your accounts, James said without preamble. Someone has been monitoring your credit card transactions, travel bookings, and communication patterns. The intrusion is sophisticated, probably corporate espionage rather than random hacking. James, I need you to listen carefully, Marcus said, settling into the gravity of the situation. I believe someone just tried to poison me. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. Are you serious? Are you safe right now? I'm safe for the moment, but I need a full security assessment of the villa and an investigation into who might have access to my personal information. Someone knew exactly what wine I planned to drink last night and had the opportunity to contaminate it. I'll have a team on a plane within 6 hours, James promised. Don't eat or drink anything that hasn't been prepared by people you absolutely trust. And, Marcus, consider leaving Italy until we can identify the threat. After ending the call, Marcus looked at Maria and Giuseppe with new appreciation. These people, whom he had initially viewed as merely household staff, had potentially saved his life through their knowledge and vigilance. I owe you an enormous debt, Marcus said to Maria. If you hadn't noticed something wrong with that wine, if you hadn't had the medical background to recognize the symptoms, this situation could have ended very differently. Maria's expression softened slightly. Senior Wellington, protecting the people in this house has been my responsibility for 25 years. I did not save your life to earn gratitude. I did it because it was the right thing to do. Her simple dignity in the face of such a serious situation impressed Marcus more than any business negotiation he had ever witnessed. Here was someone whose moral compass was absolutely unwavering, regardless of personal risk or potential reward. Giuseppe began making practical arrangements for Marcus's safety. The villa's security system needed immediate upgrading. Access to the wine cellar required additional restrictions, and all food preparation would need to be supervised more carefully. We should also consider that whoever did this might try again, Giuseppe warned. If they succeeded once in gaining access to the villa, they may have other plans already in motion. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown Italian number. The message was brief and chilling. The Count chose death over surrender. Choose wisely. The three of them stared at the message, its implications clear and terrifying. This was not a random attack or a case of mistaken identity. Someone with a direct connection to the Count's death was now targeting Marcus, possibly because he owned the villa or because he represented some threat they needed to eliminate. This confirms that the Count was murdered, Maria said quietly. And now they want to kill you too. Marcus forwarded the threatening message to James Morrison while his mind raced through possible connections between himself and the Count's business interests. He had purchased the villa through standard real estate channels, with no knowledge of the Count's personal or professional relationships. Giuseppe, I need to know everything about the Count's business dealings, Marcus said. Who were his partners, his competitors, his enemies? What kind of business was he involved in that might attract such dangerous attention? Giuseppe's expression became troubled. Senior Wellington, Count Benedetti was involved in many legitimate businesses, but also some ventures that operated in gray areas of international law. Art importing, antiquities trading, rare wine investment. He had connections throughout Europe and the Middle East. The pieces were beginning to form a disturbing picture. The Count had likely been involved in smuggling or money laundering operations that used his legitimate businesses as cover. By purchasing the villa, Marcus might have inadvertently inherited not just a property, but also the Count's enemies and their ongoing vendetta. We need to search the villa thoroughly, Marcus decided. If the Count was using this property for illegal activities, there might be evidence hidden here that explains why someone wants to kill anyone connected to this place. Maria nodded grimly. The Count had many secrets in this house. The systematic search of Villa Serenita began at dawn, with Marcus, Maria, and Giuseppe working methodically through rooms that had remained locked since the Count's death. Giuseppe produced an ornate key ring containing dozens of antique keys, each labeled in the Count's careful handwriting with locations that seemed innocuous but might hide deeper meanings. Marcus's security team had arrived during the night, led by James Morrison and including two specialists in international crime and electronic surveillance. They had immediately swept the villa for listening devices and found 3 sophisticated bugs planted in Marcus's bedroom, the main salon, and the wine cellar. Someone had been monitoring his conversations and activities since his arrival. Whoever planted these devices is professional and well-funded, James reported grimly. The equipment is military-grade, probably Israeli or German manufacture. This isn't some local criminal operation. The first breakthrough came when Maria noticed that one of the Count's study walls didn't match the others in thickness. Giuseppe examined the paneling more carefully and discovered a hidden mechanism disguised as a decorative carving. When pressed in the correct sequence, a section of the wall swung inward to reveal a concealed room. The hidden chamber was small but sophisticated, equipped with a high-end computer system, multiple secure communication devices, and filing cabinets filled with documents in several languages. Maps covered one wall, marked with shipping routes and notation symbols that suggested smuggling operations across the Mediterranean. Madonna mia, Giuseppe whispered, crossing himself as he surveyed the secret room. I worked for the Count for 30 years and never suspected this existed. James immediately began photographing everything while his team secured the computer equipment for analysis. Marcus examined the filing cabinets, finding documents that revealed the scope of the Count's illegal activities. Art theft, antiquities smuggling, money laundering, and what appeared to be weapons trafficking formed an international criminal network worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Look at this, Maria called from a corner desk where she had found a leather journal written in Italian. Her face had gone pale as she read. The Count wrote about threats against his life. He believed someone in his organization was planning to kill him and take control of the operation. She translated passages from the journal, her voice growing more troubled with each entry. He writes about suspecting his business partner, someone called Il Corvo, the Raven. This person controlled the financial side of their operations but wanted to eliminate the Count and claim his smuggling routes. Marcus felt a chill of recognition. The threatening text message mentioned that the Count chose death over surrender. Maybe he refused to give up his part of the operation to this Raven person. And now they think you have inherited whatever the Count was protecting, James concluded. By buying this villa, you became the new target. Giuseppe found another disturbing piece of evidence. Architectural plans showing hidden passages throughout the villa that connected to the wine cellar, several bedrooms, and even extended to a tunnel leading to an abandoned monastery half a mile away. The Count had created multiple escape routes and hiding places, suggesting he lived in constant fear of assassination. These passages explain how someone gained access to the wine cellar without triggering the security system, Marcus realized. They've been using the Count's own escape routes against us. Maria discovered a safe behind a false panel, its combination hidden in the Count's journal among what appeared to be random numbers, but actually represented dates significant to his criminal partnership. Inside the safe, they found evidence that made the situation even more dangerous. Photographs showed the Count meeting with individuals that James's team immediately identified as members of various international crime families. Financial records detailed transactions involving stolen masterpieces, ancient artifacts looted from archaeological sites, and what appeared to be payments for military equipment. But most alarming was a contract written in Italian and Arabic, signed by the Count, and someone identified only as Il Corvo. The agreement outlined the division of territories and profit shares in an operation that spanned from Italy to Syria, involving the systematic looting of cultural artifacts during regional conflicts. This is bigger than smuggling, James said after reviewing the documents. This is organized theft of cultural heritage on an industrial scale. Museums, archaeological sites, private collections, they were stealing and selling humanity's historical treasures to private collectors who didn't care about provenance. Marcus found himself horrified by the scope of what he had unknowingly inherited. How much money are we talking about? Based on these records, probably over $2 billion in stolen artifacts have passed through this network over the past 15 years, James calculated. The Count's share alone would have been worth several $100 million. And now Il Corvo thinks Marcus has inherited not just the villa, but also the Count's knowledge about where the artifacts are hidden and how the financial networks operate, Maria added, her medical training helping her analyze the criminal psychology involved. Giuseppe made another disturbing discovery in a hidden drawer. Photographs of the villa's staff taken over many years, including Maria, with detailed notes about their routines, loyalties, and potential usefulness. The Count had been monitoring his own household, trying to determine who could be trusted and who might be working for his enemies. He suspected everyone, Giuseppe said sadly, looking at photos of himself from different periods over the decades. Even after 30 years of faithful service, he didn't trust me completely. But he trusted Maria, Marcus observed, noting that her file contained mostly positive evaluations and comments about her medical knowledge and protective instincts. That's why he valued her so highly. She was the one person whose loyalty he never questioned. The computer system yielded even more disturbing information when James's technical specialist cracked its encryption. Email communications revealed that Il Corvo had been pressuring the Count to retire and turn over his operations for months before his death. When the Count refused, the threats escalated. Look at this message from 2 weeks before the Count died, the technician reported. Il Corvo writes, "Your stubbornness will cost you everything. There are many ways for an old man to die that appear natural." The evidence clearly indicated that the Count had been murdered, probably through slow-acting poison that mimicked a heart attack. Maria's medical expertise had saved Marcus from suffering the same fate. "We need to understand what Il Corvo believes Marcus now possesses," James said. "There must be something specific they think he inherited besides the villa." The answer came from an unlikely source. While examining the Count's personal effects, Maria noticed that several expensive watches were missing from his collection. Giuseppe confirmed that the Count had owned a dozen rare timepieces worth hundreds of thousands of dollars each. He was very particular about those watches, Giuseppe remembered. He said they were more than just timepieces, that they held the keys to his most important secrets. A thorough search of the villa's hidden passages revealed a concealed vault beneath the main staircase, accessible only through a complex mechanism that required specific tools and knowledge. Inside, they found the missing watches along with something far more valuable, detailed maps and coordinates for dozens of locations across Europe and the Middle East where stolen artifacts were hidden. Each watch contained micro-engraved numbers that corresponded to GPS coordinates and depth measurements. The Count had created a treasure map worth billions of dollars, using his watch collection as the key to decode the locations. This is what Il Corvo wants, Marcus realized. Not the villa, not the business operations, but these coordinates. They represent the location of every major artifact the network has stolen and hidden over the past decade. And they think you now have access to this information because you bought the Count's property, Maria concluded. They tried to kill you before you could discover what the Count was protecting. James immediately began making arrangements to transfer the evidence to secure locations while coordinating with international law enforcement agencies. The scope of the criminal network required cooperation between multiple countries' police forces and art recovery specialists. We need to get you out of Italy immediately, James told Marcus. Once Il Corvo realizes their poisoning attempt failed and that you've discovered the Count's secrets, they'll escalate to direct assassination attempts. But Marcus surprised everyone with his response. Looking at Maria and Giuseppe, seeing their courage in helping him uncover these dangerous secrets, he made a decision that went against every instinct for self-preservation. I'm not running away, he declared. These artifacts belong in museums, not in private collections owned by criminals. The Count spent his final months trying to figure out how to return what he had stolen. That's why Il Corvo wanted him dead, because he was planning to go to the authorities. Marcus found evidence supporting this theory in the Count's journal. The final entries described his growing remorse about the cultural damage his network had caused, particularly the destruction of archaeological sites in Syria and Iraq. He had been secretly negotiating with UNESCO and Interpol about returning the stolen artifacts in exchange for reduced criminal charges. Il Corvo discovered the Count's plan to cooperate with international authorities, Marcus continued. That's why they killed him. And now they think I might continue his plan to return the stolen artifacts. Maria stepped forward, her expression resolute. Senior Wellington, if you choose to fight these criminals instead of fleeing, you will not face them alone. Giuseppe and I have protected this house for decades. We will continue to protect it, and everyone within it. Giuseppe nodded firmly. The Count was not a bad man, not entirely. In his final years, he tried to make amends for his crimes. If you can help finish what he started, you will have our complete loyalty. James shook his head at the dangerous idealism of their plan, but Marcus could see the professional respect in his eyes. If you're determined to see this through, we'll need a comprehensive security plan and complete cooperation from international law enforcement. And we'll need to move fast before Il Corvo realizes how much we've discovered. The decision to stay and fight rather than flee marked a turning point for Marcus. The peaceful retreat he had sought in purchasing the villa had transformed into a mission that would either restore stolen cultural treasures to their rightful places or cost him his life. But as he looked around the hidden room filled with evidence of decades of systematic looting, Marcus realized that some fights were worth the risk. The artifacts represented more than monetary value. They were pieces of human history that belonged to all mankind, not to wealthy criminals who viewed culture as just another commodity to be bought and sold. Maria's warning about the poisoned wine had saved his life, but it had also revealed an opportunity to right wrongs that stretched back decades. With her medical expertise, Giuseppe's intimate knowledge of the villa, and James's security resources, Marcus began to believe they might actually succeed in finishing what the Count had started. The next phase of their battle against Il Corvo and the international smuggling network would require careful planning, considerable courage, and the kind of teamwork that Marcus had never experienced in his previous business ventures. The stakes were higher than any corporate takeover, but so was the potential reward for success. As they prepared to leave the hidden room and begin planning their counterattack, Marcus realized that his life had been fundamentally changed by a black-clad Italian maid whose quiet warning had opened a door to secrets worth dying to protect. I always wondered why certain rooms were kept locked, why he received visitors at odd hours, why he seemed so frightened in his final months. As Marcus's physical symptoms gradually subsided, replaced by the adrenaline of survival and discovery, he realized that his peaceful Italian retreat had become the center of a deadly mystery that stretched back decades. The beautiful villa that was supposed to represent his escape from the pressures of modern life had instead drawn him into a web of international crime and murder. But, looking at Maria and Giuseppe, seeing their unwavering commitment to protecting him despite the personal danger they now faced, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the knowledge that he wasn't alone in facing this crisis. These people, whom he had initially planned to replace with more modern staff, had become his allies in a fight for survival that was just beginning. The warning Maria had given him in Italian about the wine had saved his life, but it had also opened a door to secrets that someone was willing to kill to protect. Marcus hadn't noticed anything unusual about the wine, a 1982 Brolo from the Count's private reserve. It had tasted complex and rich, exactly as he expected from such an exceptional vintage. "It seemed fine to me," he replied. "Perhaps you're just tired." Maria nodded, but her expression remained troubled as she carried the dishes back to the kitchen. Marcus dismissed the incident, attributing her concern to an overly protective attitude toward the Count's wine collection. The next morning brought the first hint that Maria's instincts were far more significant than Marcus had realized.